everyone, I'm Ellie and welcome back to the final part of my Rey build log. Today we are going to be finally finishing this costume. I've been working on it since January, so that's like 7 months and I am ready to be done with it. So let's go ahead, get started, and finish her up. The first accessory I wanted to work on for Rey was her wig. I bought this wig off Amazon from a company called Inline Wigs, and you can find my review of them up in the little iCard if you're interested. It is a pretty good wig, and I'm happy with my purchase. First, we're going to section off the top part of her hair. That's going to go into a ponytail. I didn't have any elastics, so I'm using some cording that I'm wrapping around and tucking into itself to tie it into place. This also looks a bit like leather and more rustic, like something Rey would have in her hair. With the first ponytail in place, I pull out the second, making sure to leave some room for the front hair locks, which go in front of your sideburns. And I'll be pulling this back and then also grabbing the tail of the top ponytail and again wrapping it all together using some cording. So after a quick coat of hairspray and making sure everything is where I like it, it's time to trim off the length. This wig was very, very long. It went almost to my waist and I need it to go just about to my shoulders. So I'm going to trim off all the extra hair and then go along the bottom with my scissors pointing upwards. This feathers the ends and makes it a little bit softer than if I were to just chop off all this length. For wigs that are in ponytails or other pulled back styles, it's really important that you're either styling it on a wig head that is your size or you're trying it on very frequently. When you pull hair back like this, it changes the size and shape of the wig, and you want to make sure it still fits your head once it's finished. Now that the wig is finished, we can move on to the other accessories like the belt and the bracer. Here I'm making the pattern for my bracer based off a pattern that's available on Facebook in the Rey cosplay community. It's a really, really great pattern and it works perfectly for what I needed. So after I created the basic shape, I went through and marked where all my slits will be. All of Rey's leather goods close by inserting the tail of the leather into slits cut into other parts of the leather. This way they hold together but don't need any sort of metal fastening like a snap. Once I marked those slits, the bracer pattern was done and it's time to move on to the belt. The belt, I didn't have a pattern to go off and I had to conceptualize it. It's one piece with a waist belt and then a hip belt. And they need to be connected but can't have any sort of seams. So I'm going to angle the hip belt so that way it falls down naturally. So I started by marking 1/2 of the belt first. I marked the top section of the waist belt. And now I'm going through and adding the line for the hip belt, which is, as you can see, angled apart from the waist belt. Once I had marked out 1/2 of it, I went ahead and cut it out on the fold so that way both sides would be exactly the same. And with my belt cut out, it was time to figure out how I was going to connect the belt. One end of her belt has D-rings, so I angled the edges to put those in. And the other edge has a long tail that can be inserted into the D-ring and then through the slits on the belt. So after angling the edges of the belt in, I attached the longer tail so that way I could insert that into the slit and close off my belt. So with the paper pattern of my belt cut out, I wanted to try it on my dress form. So I very gently put it on top of my obi, and here you can see I put some mock-up D-rings in there made from floral wire and then inserted the tail through the slits. While the belt does look pretty big here, it's important to know that all those other layers of the costume like the tunic and the pants and the wraps, everything adds a whole lot of bulk, so the belt does need to be a little bigger than you would expect. So now that I'm happy with my patterns, it's time to cut them out. Rather than using leather, I decided to use craft foam for this project. I've never worked with leather before, it's expensive, and personally, I don't really like using it, so craft foam was my next best option. After I traced the entire pattern, I cut it out with my scissors, making sure not to bevel the edges, as I wanted my edges to be straight and clean. And then I did the same thing with the bracer. I was originally going to use 2 layers of craft foam, but it turns out I only needed 1. And now it's time to make my craft foam look like leather. I'm using a technique here which involves aluminum foil and ironing it onto my craft foam. It creates a really cool texture that looks a lot like leather. So here's the finished leather texture. I think it looks absolutely amazing, and it really does look like finished leather. So now it's time to paint our leather bits. I'm using a mixture of acrylic paint, tacky glue, and water, so that way once it dries, it'll still be somewhat flexible and won't be as rigid as if I painted simply with acrylic paint. Unfortunately, I did end up losing almost all of my painting footage except for this one little bit. But I did use many layers of paint. As I was painting these layers on, I used very little paint at a time, almost like dry brushing. So that way it would mix together and it wouldn't go all the way into all the crevices and we would see all the different colors that I used. So I used at least 2 layers of a very dark brown, 1 layer of a medium brown, a layer of a lighter brown, and then highlights of a lightest brown. The insides of these accessories were painted to be quite a bit lighter than the outside. So that way when they tuck together and the tails come out, you will notice a difference in color and it'll give it a bit more dimension. So skipping past all the painting, we're going to go ahead and get the D-rings attached to our belt. I'm using rings that I salvaged from boots I've used for different cosplays. I have 1 larger one and 1 smaller one. You might also notice that there is a layer of duck canvas on this part of the belt. I attached that as I was painting to make sure that it would be extra sturdy since that's where most of the load is going to be. Once I have the D-rings where I like them, I attach them with a little bit of hot glue and then some E6000. I use the E6000 for a sturdy hold and the hot glue for a quick hold. So that way I don't have to wait for the E6000 to dry before continuing with the project. Now on the other side of the belt, we're going to go through and cut our slits using an X-Acto knife. And now it's time to attach our twine. This is just twine that I had left over from my wedding decorations actually. And I am wrapping it around each part of the belt and then hot gluing the edges individually. I don't want any hot glue to show on the front, so I'm only using hot glue on the back edges. So with the belt done, I wanted to try it on, make sure it looked right. And while the craft foam with the paint on it is a little bit tacky and sticky, it still looks really good. It looks just like leather. With all the other accessories finished, all that's left is our arm wraps. I'm using some gauze that I tea-dyed quite a few years ago, and I'm wrapping around my arm with an arm sock on, so that way it'll hold it on and I don't have to worry about it slipping around. And with that, our Rey costume is finally finished! Like I said, I've been working on this costume for 6 or 7 months at this point, and I'm just really happy for it to be done, and I'm even happier that it looks good. I've worked really hard on this costume, and it feels so good to finally see it all come together. And now I guess it's time for me to get started on Kylo Ren so I can finish that up soon too, right? As always, I want to thank you guys so much for tuning into this series. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope I helped you make your Rey costume. As always, leave a like, a comment, subscribe, whatever you can. Thank you so much. Keep sewing, stay positive, have fun. I'll see you all later.